In this video, I'm going to do a pre-read of the paper Famine, Affluence, and Morality by Peter Singer. This is a paper written by a contemporary philosopher. It's published in a peer-reviewed academic journal. I'm expecting this to be an argumentative paper. So in my pre-read, what I'm going to be focusing on is the introductory paragraph or section, the conclusion or concluding section, and major sections of the paper. Often, papers include section titles. Those are really helpful to look at. So I'm going to take a skim of this and, oh, it's a lot of text and there are no section titles. So one thing that I'm going to add to my pre-read to-do list is skimming the beginning of each paragraph and looking for places where the author is either beginning a new section or concluding a section, giving some cues to the reader where they're wrapping up an argument, restating something, so that I can identify sections for myself. And one thing I might do is try to add my own section titles to the paper. I want to chunk this paper into as few components as possible, as early in my reading process as possible, so that I can have a picture or an understanding of the paper as a whole before I dig into the details, because I don't want to get lost in the detail and miss the forest for the trees. So I said I wanted to begin with the introductory section. It's worth noting what we're looking for in an introductory section. Often it's just the first paragraph, and it would be a pretty useful rule of thumb to just say read the first paragraph, but an introduction is not always contained in a single paragraph. Sometimes it's a section of multiple paragraphs. So instead of looking for a particular paragraph location within the paper, I'm going to look for components that I expect to find in an introduction, especially for an academic argumentative paper like this one. Okay, so what I'm looking for is some kind of motivating question or problem, which may or may not be explicitly stated as a question with a question mark or identified as a problem by using the word problem. But usually an introduction to an argumentative paper sets up a question to be answered or a problem to be solved. And I'm looking for an explicit statement of the main claim. Maybe the main claim isn't always going to be explicitly stated up front, but in a paper like this one, I'm expecting an explicit statement of the main claim up front. And so I'm going to be on the lookout for that. And then I'm also going to identify what in the introduction is the context for this motivating question or main claim, because the context is sometimes confused for the point of the paper, but what I really want to do is hone in on the point of the paper. So as I start reading, I'm going to look at the first sentence. Oftentimes the first sentence is called the topic sentence of a paragraph, and everything else in the paper connects back to and often supports that first sentence. But the introductory paragraph of a paper is often an exception. Oftentimes, the main point of the paper is somewhere towards the end of the first paragraph. The main claim comes after we've introduced and contextualized it, so the first sentence may or may not tell me what the first paragraph or introduction or the paper is about. So as I write this, people are dying in East Bengal from lack of food, shelter, and medical care. So one thing I might predict is maybe this whole paper is establishing that this is the case. But as I read on, I see that that's not quite what the point of this paragraph is. So reading on to the next sentence, the suffering and death that are occurring there now are not inevitable, not unavoidable in any fatalistic sense of the term. So now I'm predicting that something bad is happening and it's not inevitable. We can do something about it. That's starting to sound like a problem. There's a problem that needs to be solved. There's something we need to do. So I'm expecting something along the lines of we should do something. It's going to be a main claim. Constant poverty, a cyclone, and a civil war have turned at least 9 million people into destitute refugees. Nevertheless, it is not beyond the capacity of the richer nations to give enough assistance to reduce any further suffering to very small proportions. So here we're still getting the we should do something. The decisions and actions of human beings can prevent this kind of suffering. We can do something. Unfortunately, human beings have not made the necessary decisions. At the individual, okay, so now I've got another claim. So bad things are happening. We could do something about them, but we are not. So maybe this is the point of the first paragraph, and maybe this is the point of the whole paper. Bad things are happening, we could do something, and we're not. Question, is the point establishing that we're not doing something we could, or will there be a further so what? To be determined. At the individual level, people have, so we're establishing that we're not doing stuff at the individual level. What is it we're not doing? We're not giving money. We're not writing to our representatives. We are not demonstrating in the streets or holding symbolic fasts or any other kind of thing that might contribute as a solution to this problem. At the government level, so another way I'm expecting that we're not taking the necessary actions required. No massive aid given, and what develops here is just what governments are giving and in comparison to other things they spend money on. So it seems obvious that assistance on the scale required will not be forthcoming, and so either people are going to starve now or starve later. So recap, another thing you can do when you are reading critically through a paper is recap after each paragraph and ask yourself, what was the point of this paragraph? This paragraph introduces a problem and some facts about that problem. We could do something and we're not. Next paragraph. These are the essential facts about the present situation in Bengal. So these are some facts. So far as it concerns us here, there's nothing unique about this situation. So we've been given information about a particular bad thing happening in Bengal, but this is indicating that our point isn't about Bengal. Okay, so what is the point? It's just the latest and most acute of a series of major emergencies arising, blah, blah, blah. There are also many parts of the world in which people die from malnutrition and lack of food independent of any special emergency. Bengal is just an example. Why? Because in 1972, when this is written, it is the present concern, and it's large enough that people are familiar with it as a problem. Neither individuals nor governments can claim to be unaware of what is happening here. Okay. Question. I'm on the lookout for questions in the introductory section. What are the moral implications of a situation like this? And what is the situation like this? Yes, Bengal, but more generally, a situation in which something bad is happening, which is preventable, and we're not doing anything to prevent it. In what follows, I shall argue that. Beautiful. We have argument indicator words, and since this is in the beginning of the paper, and there's an I shall argue that, I'm expecting what comes directly after that to be the main claim of the paper. The way people in relatively affluent countries react to a situation like that in Bengal cannot be justified. Indeed, the whole way we look at moral issues, our conceptual moral scheme, needs to be altered, and with it, the way of life that has come to be taken for granted in our society. So, we were predicting in the first paragraph that the point would be there's a problem and maybe the main claim will be a solution or something we should do. Well, there seems to be sort of a two-part main claim here. And one is not just about what we should do, but about a moral claim about what we are and are not doing. It's cannot be justified. So doing nothing can't be justified. Perhaps we ought to do something. It's wrong not to do something. Doing nothing can't be justified. Those might be synonymous ways of stating the main claim. And given that doing nothing can't be justified, is wrong, we ought to do something, it follows that we actually need to do something, perhaps. And maybe what we need to do is rethink our entire moral scheme, the way we think about our duties itself. Not just what you ought to do is give money, do something, right? But also we ought to examine and perhaps change the very way we live, the very way we organize our society and the moral duties of members of our society. In arguing for this conclusion, I will not, of course, claim to be morally neutral. I shall, however, try to argue. Okay, so you're going to argue for the position. This feels like the end of the introductory section. I've got a motivating question. What are the moral implications of a situation in which bad things are happening and nobody is doing anything? And the main claim is the moral implications are doing nothing can't be justified, and so we need to rethink how we react to things like this, which involves examining our very moral categories, our moral conceptual scheme. And then we've got context for the claim, which is a specific emergency situation in which people are taking this attitude, which he presumably is about to criticize. Next, I'm going to skim to the end of the paper, not including the postscript, the actual end of the paper as he wrote it, and see if there is a conclusion, like a proper ending to the paper. This paragraph starts with a third point, so this is still in the middle of some larger thing. I mentioned, okay, so it is sometimes said maybe these two paragraphs are the concluding section. This might be a response to this, or maybe this applies to the whole paper. You should probably read through this and ask yourself, what are you taking away from the conclusion? Sometimes the essential point of the paper is really captured towards the end, or emphasized towards the end, or connected to some further question we might ask, but usually you can get some kind of picture of what the purpose of this paper is and what we should take away from it. So read that. Then the next thing I'm going to do is try to identify major sections of the paper. So back to the beginning, what am I looking for as I identify major sections of the paper? I'm going to use the first sentence of various paragraphs just to figure out when it seems like a new idea is beginning and when things are being wrapped up. So if there's language that suggests this conclusion is being wrapped up and I'm moving on to a next point, some kind of transition, either sentence or transition paragraph. So a quick note on identifying transitions. Transitions often happen at the beginning of a paragraph. They can happen at the end, but usually they happen at the beginning, and usually they are more effective at the beginning. Now, the first sentence of a paragraph often states the topic, point, or claim of that paragraph. It's often called the topic sentence. But in many cases, this new topic is introduced by relating it to the topic of the previous paragraph. That's why transitions often happen at the beginning of a paragraph. So sometimes it's the first sentence, sometimes it's the last sentence, and sometimes transitions take up a whole paragraph of their own. They're a sort of roadmap of the argument, where we've come from and where we're going next. So let's skim through and take a look at the topic sentences of the various paragraphs and come up with a sort of structure of the paper, and maybe we'll supply our own headings if pretending we were going to add headings or section titles to this paper. Try it on your own and then check out my next video where I'll share what I got.